As I come across games to play and highlight here on the channel, I'm often surprised by which games are connected to others. Today's NES games, Flying Dragon, The Secret Scroll, and Flying Warriors is one such example. Sure, both have flying in the title, but the covers hardly look related to each other. I guess one clue would be that they are both developed by Culture Brain, and the two sit side by side in an alphabetical listing of North American releases, and both games straddle being side-scrollers and fighting games, but look, no one said I was smart. So it turns out these games are quite similar, and for a reason. And while they are the only two in the series to show up on the NES, the series they stem from, sometimes referred to as the Fist of the Flying Dragon series, is made up of several games spanning arcades, NES, Super NES, Game Boy, PlayStation, and N64. Today, we'll definitely cover the two NES games, Flying Dragon and Flying Warriors, and we'll take a quick look at three others that were released on Famicom and never made their way to North America. Their translated titles are Fist of the Flying Dragon 2, Dragon's Wings, Fist of the Flying Dragon 3, Dragon Warriors, and Fist of the Flying Dragon Special, Fighting Warriors. Now we've got a lot of Flying Dragon fisting to do, so let's get started and see what's up. Now again, these games straddle genres. There's the side-scrolling platform levels and the one-on-one fighting levels with a tiny bit of role-playing for flavor. You're a fighter whose Kempo master was attacked and robbed of some secret scrolls, and his dying wish was for you to get those back. So, you train for 6 years so you can compete in the World Tournament of Contact Sports. You know that's going to air on ESPN3 at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday night, but you do it anyway. The tournament is spread across multiple locations, and you have to be the champion of each location to earn back a scroll, but it's not as easy as going down to the arena and signing up. Before you fight your way through the tournaments, you have to fight your way to the tournaments. And it's not as easy as just walking down the street and bopping all the bad guys on the head, no. You have to defeat specific bad guys and earn a key, so you can enter a special door to the next tournament. So, as you mosey down the road, or whatever, you'll come face to face with regular baddies and they're no issue. They're always one punch or kick away from falling off the planet. But ever so often a mini-boss appears, usually denoted by the darkening of the background and some doomy music. These enemies take a few hits and can be squirrely to catch on screen, but if you are able to defeat them quickly enough, you'll earn a power-up shown at the top. Defeating each mini-boss will grant you a powered-up punch and kick attack, extra jumping power, the ability to shoot a projectile called Cosmic Saucers, and the fourth one gives you more intense Cosmic Saucers. And then once you have all those, the last boss will finally give you the key to go through that special door. If you aren't able to defeat one of the bosses before they leave the screen, hey, no worries. These stages loop over and over, so they'll come back around eventually. And don't just take your aggressions out on anything that moves, you can punch statues and walls to uncover other power-ups like health refills, barrier shields, and extra points if you're into that. Having the power-ups you earn from the mini-bosses is great for the side-scrolling levels, but doesn't carry over to the one-on-one tournaments. Once you pass through the door and into the fighting arena, you're basically playing a different game. The first time you get here, the game will give you a surprisingly thorough tutorial on how this works, but it's essentially what I call Simon Says fighting. You react to the circles on the screen. If a red mark appears on your enemy's face, you punch them in the face. If it appears on their leg, kick them in the shin. If a circle appears on you, then you need to block and protect yourself. As you progress through the game, you'll earn abilities that let you see other weak points on the enemy, but the gist remains the same: react fast to what Simon says. The first few enemies are pretty simple, but once you get to the final fighter in the tournament, the real challenge begins. Their attacks hit harder, it's tougher to get them within striking distance, and you have to think faster in order to land hits and dodge. It'll take some practice, but I found these fights to be kind of fun in a rhythm game kind of way, where you're reacting to what you see on screen and timing your inputs accordingly. It's not a very deep mechanic, but for a one-on-one fighting section of the game, it's certainly innovative. And it's not all punches and kicks here. There are combos spelled out in the manual, like throwing your enemy to the ground after a block and more. There's also a meter in the upper right, the KO meter. When this is full, you can unleash a devastating spin kick. The game is forgiving in that you do get unlimited continues, but if you lose your last life in the tournament, you'll have to start the most recent platforming level over. You always start with 3 lives, but you can uncover extras by hitting those statues in the side-scrolling sections. The biggest bummer is that in order to beat the game, you have to complete very specific actions at certain points throughout. Now, to be fair, these are spelled out in the manual, but they are so oddly specific that it would be easy to forget to do them or just mess it up completely, and you can't go back. So then when you get to the end of the game, you can't beat it. Like the first one, for example. You have to not attack or defend against the last enemy in the second elimination round, and then wait for a star to appear above his head, and then you have to hit it. You may never learn that on your own. You can earn second chances for this if you uncover a question mark icon while out on your journey, but still, it seems tedious. And all the game is somewhat defined by its tedium, but that's not to say it's bad or anything. I thought it was pretty fun, although punching a young girl in the street is admittedly weird, but clearly she started it. And fair warning, this is one of those dastardly games where beating it once isn't enough. If you want the true ending, you need to go through it twice. Flying Dragon consists of 5 levels, each split by side-scrolling and fighting stages. The platforming feels fluid, the fighting is neat, the graphics and presentation are fine, the music fits, but it's up to you to see if you can pull off the perfect moves against the right enemy at the right time to get back those scrolls. Flying Warriors is a little more of the same while feeling altogether new and different. If you're interested in the game's lineage and chronology, it is actually a combination of 2 of the 3 Famicom games mentioned earlier, Fist of the Dragon 2 and 3 specifically, and it released only in North America. The game is paced the same with side-scrolling beat-em-up action interlaced with one-on-one fighting bouts. The graphics are improved from Flying Dragon and the sprites are much larger, which is both good and bad. The sprites look good, but your character is slow and the zoomed-in view means descending platforms is a gamble as you can't see beneath you. This one has much more in the way of platforming and finding your way around a level, not a straightforward A to B experience like the original. You might even become lost. It's also not as simple as kicking butt to earn a key this time around. You'll have to complete tasks for people you meet in order to proceed onward, like find some woman's robe or pay 20 coins to buy a bracelet that gets you through a gated area. For depth, this is all well and good, but the attrition from the constant onslaught of enemies holds it back. Enemies spawn constantly, with almost no breaks, typically in threes, and from all directions. In Flying Dragon, these enemies were easy enough to dispatch with good placement and timing. But here, it seems no matter what strategy I used, I always took some damage. Whether I spammed the kick button and turned my guy into Super Chuck Norris, or whether I took my time and tried to deliberately kick each goon in the face, I would somehow always miss enough times to whittle down my health. So hit detection leaves something to be desired here. I also didn't get the hang of jump kicking. There are a number of flying and swooping enemies where jumping and planting a boot on them would do the trick, but timing that jump kick just right is an art in and of itself. So much for being a flying warrior, I guess. Also, the game has the problem of using up on the D-pad as jump, but if you want to punch something, you have to press up and A, so sometimes you jump when you mean to punch, or you punch when you would have rather jumped if you don't get that timing just right. And speaking of jumping, there are lots of pitfalls to be found if you don't make a jump, and enemies cause knockbacks, so prepare yourself for plenty of Castlevania-like flashbacks when trying to make your way over some of the chasms. It's also worth noting that as you play, you build a party of characters you can swap between during the fighting segments, and certain battles even take on a turn-based format. This game is surprisingly all over the place with its mechanics. I think Flying Warriors would be a great game if the mechanical frustrations didn't bog it down so much. There's a get-good factor here that you'll need a lot of patience to reach before settling into a groove, but all that's just for the side-scrolling sections. When a one-on-one fight breaks out, you'll find it all very familiar to the original. It's nearly the exact same recipe. You just react to the dots on screen and go at them Simon Says style. Occasionally, you'll strike an opponent and enter a rush mode where you can lay down a beating in short order, which is definitely rewarding. The KO meter is back again, and it fills as you defeat enemies and drops when you take damage. If you fill it to 100, you can unleash the Cosmic Saucer, which I believe is just you kicking fireballs out of your socks. It rules, but I had a tough time keeping it for very long. Flying Warriors does give the player a ton of options off the top. You can select from 3 difficulty levels, or jump straight into a tournament mode if you just want to play the fighting game portion. However, if you want the true ending, you have to complete the game on Expert, the hardest difficulty level. Then you can also choose from 2 controller operations, Standard and Master. Standard is supposedly easier, and the AI assists you, while the Master option is for folks who like action and martial arts, according to the manual. But what if you like martial arts and not dying a lot? Well, then you might be completely out of luck. Sorry. There is a password system, so if you die, you can select Continue, or you can take a password down to start back at the most recent checkpoint. Strange, however, is the Continue system. You start with 4 continues, and if you have to use one, the game starts you back at the same area of the stage where you died. Pretty normal. But if you run out of continues, it's not game over. Instead, when you die with no continues left, it just forces you to start back at the beginning of your current stage with all of your equipment. So in that sense, the game has infinite continues, but gives you 4 really gracious ones to start with. That, coupled with the password system, makes this game at least a bit forgiving. Flying Warriors has 8 total levels, interspersed with the action side-scrolling and the fighting modes, and the levels are long and, as I alluded to, kinda tough at times, especially in the early levels. The first 3 stages seem to be the toughest, and since you level up as you go, you're pretty weak early on. That's all compounded by the fact that every 90 seconds or so, you're bombarded by mini-bosses, typically in the form of these gargoyles, and they pack a wallop. Getting some practice against these guys and learning how to defeat them without losing a ton of health is a major key to your overall success with the game. Altogether, this one takes a while to beat, but does require the player to get a good grasp of all it has to offer in order to stand a chance. You'll certainly need to master the controls and get a feel for the hit detection. You'll need to understand how to get the most out of your KO meter, what items to buy and when to use your transform ability, and in some cases it's good to know where to go, as there are occasional forking paths. As for the story, well, you take control of Rick Stalker, which is one of the most 1980s names ever imagined. This time, instead of scrolls, you're trying to earn 5 pieces of a talisman from bad dudes you fight throughout the game. Each piece you find makes you stronger in combat. Light and dark magic, mysticism, martial arts, all that stuff, it's all here. Really quickly, the Famicom games that never came to North America. First up is Fist of the Flying Dragon 2, which released a year after Flying Dragon. The game looks and feels much more like Flying Warriors would eventually look a couple years later, but is also a janky mess, with respawning enemies that suicide themselves from cliffs, and the jumping with the D-pad feels really weird. I couldn't find a translation for this one, or for any of the Famicom games, so they're not going to be really all that playable for anyone who can't read the text, unless you just want to aimlessly walk around and ignore all the clues that are likely critical to your success. Then in 1990 comes Fist of the Flying Dragon 3, and once again, I did not track down a translation, but did find this one to play more friendly than the last one. In fact, I think mechanically it's better than Flying Warriors, in terms of hit detection and fluidity, and even level structure. The opening level or so was just more interesting than anything I played with Flying Warriors. This one starts out nearly the same as Flying Warriors 2, with an introduction to the fighting mechanics off the bat, and a seemingly similar story introduction. If this one had a translation, I'm betting it would be a fun one to explore further. Then finally, Fist of the Flying Dragon Special, Fighting Wars. This one removes all that pesky journeyman stuff and focuses all on the fighting. Once again, no translation to be found, but you can select from different fighters, customize their abilities, and set off in a tournament of champions. The game starts off simple and ramps it up a little as you go. It's a bit repetitive, but actually pretty fun. This is one you could probably get through without being able to read the text on screen, since the story is nearly absent. The game is akin to the tournament mode found in Flying Warriors, with some added depth. The Fist of the Flying Dragon series carried on until the year 2000, mostly in Japan, but did release Flying Dragon on the N64 in North America that some of you may be familiar with. It was a fighting game with progression mechanics and decent graphics that has amassed a bit of a cult following over the years. Well, that does it for Fist of the Flying Dragon games on the NES and Famicom. Now, as always, be on the lookout for Rick Stalker, and thanks for watching.